Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or good morning or good evening. One of those is probably correct. Wherever you are, whenever you are, welcome. Today we're going to be discussing the idea of hemispheric dominance in the brain. Specifically, can you be left-brained? Can you be right-brained? Can you be both? Neither. Get into what that is, how that came about, and why it's actually not true. So the myth is this: people, especially students, are often classified as being left-brained or right-brained. Now, these terms came about, according to Carey, during the 1960s when psychologists were studying these split brain patients, right? People that had epilepsy and seizures that literally had their brain cut in half, and they coined the terms left-brained or right-brained. Now, we've come to think of people that are left-brained as people that are more logical, more calculating. We see those kind of students being successful in math classes and science classes, but really struggling with their more creative endeavors. Whereas students that are right-brained, we see writing very creatively, very artistic kind of students, and we label them. We do. I have always thought of myself as left-brained, right? I excel at math. I really love science. I'm a chemistry teacher now. Um, and as I've noted, once you're labeled that, you hold on to that, generally speaking, for your entire life, right? Most people, once they decide, oh, I'm left-brained, they don't change that idea, right? They hang on to that. Um, Unfortunately, that's just nonsense, right? The generally accepted meanings of left brain and right brain aren't true, right? They don't apply. In this video right here, this brain hemisphere dominance debunked, they get into the specifics of why that's not true, but basically, you don't use one side of your brain more or less for creative thinking, for logic, right? If it was possible to be left-brained or right-brained, over 90% of the entire world would be left-brained. Now, the reason for this is that the left side of your brain controls the right side of your body, right? When you're talking about movement and motor control. And 90% of people are right-hand dominant. So if you were left-brained, right, that means you use your left side of your brain more, you must be right-handed. The left side of your brain also controls speech functions, right? So if you like to talk and move and are right-handed, you're probably a left brain dominant person. Now, this just kind of doesn't track, though, and that's why this myth has percolated so much, is that there are people that are far more creative, and it's not like only 10% of the country is creative types and 90% are cold, logical, calculating thinkers, even though most people we would classify, according to that definition, as left brain. Um, so where does that creativity come from, right? Because in a 2013 study, these people that I'll talk about later tested 160,000 Americans with an online kind of test and survey, asking them a bunch of different questions about how they would respond to certain situations, and classified 37% of them as left brain, meaning more logical, more calculating, and 29% of them as right brain, and 34% of them, not super dominant either way. But that says that about 30% of people, right, are more creative than logical. But we just said that only about 10% of people at most can be quote unquote right brain, right, are right brain dominant. So where does this creativity come from, right? Because we can see it, and the left brain, right brain theory kind of helps explain that. And that's why I think why it has gained so much popularity, but it doesn't. So where does that creativity come from? The answer comes in a study in 2018 by a man named Beatty and his colleagues, and there was a lot of them. And they wanted to know, right, if it's not the left brain, right brain, what part of the brain is responsible for creative thinking, right, and creative problem solving? And they used an fMRI and gave people what's called an alternate use test. Basically, they gave them something like a sock and said, come up with a different use for this thing. And they graded these people, right, on the creativity of their responses. So a 1 would be something super not very creative, like warming a foot, right, which is pretty much what a sock is for anyways. Whereas something like a water filtration system would have been a very, very high score, a very creative alternate use of this object. And as these people were coming up with their ideas, they noticed that the people that had the highest scores also reported enjoying the more creative, artistic hobbies. They had these different activities in their life. And what they found, according to the fMRI results, is that the people that came up with the more creative solutions did, in fact, kind of generally exhibit greater blood flow to certain areas of the brain, right? So clearly, there are some areas of the brain that are responsible for creative thinking. Now, the significant part of this is that it's not just one part, right, or even a section of parts. The trick here is that these people were using what's called the default network and the executive network at the same time. Now, generally speaking, those two networks, those two sections of the brain, don't get used at the same time. They just don't. But really, really creative people can use both at the same time. Now, and they took that study and they said, okay, so if this blood flow, right, there's increased usage of this part of the brain is related to creative thinking, then we should be able to look at people, right, using an fMRI and say, if they have that higher blood flow without ever testing them first, we should be able to predict, this person will have a super creative answer, this person not so much, this person, maybe, maybe not. And sure enough, they were, right? And not perfectly, but with some degree of certainty, they could look at a person's fMRI and say, okay, that blood flow to those particular regions is really high. Their answer is going to be creative, and it was. Whereas people that had almost no blood flow to those areas had very, very uncreative answers, right? Very, very non-original answers. Now, why does this matter? Right? Who cares? First of all, as teachers, right? And I know that I'm guilty of this as the next person, probably more so because I really, really, prescribed to this myth until I started doing my research here. We put children in a box when we label them as left or right-brained, right? We do that. Now, if I tell a person, oh, you must be super left-brained, they instantly start to say, okay, I'm good at math and science, but I'm bad at creative writing, at art, at all these different things. They put themselves in these categories and start to just assume that they're going to be bad at stuff. And I notice this a lot in science. I have students that are amazingly artistic, right? So talented when it comes to creative thinking and writing and drawing. And they get to my class and they go, Mister, I'm right-brained. I'm not really good at science. And that's just wrong, right? We have these creative students that are using part of their brain that's designed for analytical thinking when they're being creative. They just don't know it, and because we've drawn this box around them for them, they kind of assume that they're going to be bad at the quote-unquote left-brained subjects, right? And this it hinders them, right? So we need to debunk this myth straight away. Second of all, the parts of the brain that were working together for these creative thinkers in this study were the parts, like I mentioned, that are for tight focus and control the analysis, but also the part for spontaneous thinking, for daydreaming. And in the book that we talked about earlier, Carrie notes the importance of that spontaneous thinking process to learning, right? Taking a break, just letting your mind wander, letting it daydream, letting your mind kind of come up with solutions to problems without you. Right now, everybody does that, but it's stimulated during creative thinking. So if we label people as quote-unquote left brain, right? We talk about what happens if you label them right brain, they're going to come into different classes and think that they're terrible. If we label them as left brain and say, you're not very creative, then we inhibit the growth of this part of their mind that's logical, that's responsible for creative thinking. And we're holding our children back when we label them as left-brained or right-brained, right? And for that reason alone, and for others, I very strongly believe that we should stop using these terms left-brained or right-brained and instead explain, what is creative thinking and encourage our students to think creatively constantly. Thank you very much.